Once upon a time, the trees wanted to anoint a king over them. So they went to the fig tree. But the fig tree refused, saying, "Why should I give up my sweet fruit to reign over you?" So the trees went to the olive tree. But the olive tree also refused, saying, "Why should I give up my rich oil to reign over you?" Then they went to the grapevine. But he too refused, saying, "Why should I give up my savory wine to reign over you?" Then the trees went to the thorn bush. And the thorn bush demanded to be king, saying, "You have to take shelter under my thorns. If you don't, I will burn all the forests of the world down, even the great trees of Lebanon." This parable actually comes from the Bible, and ironically, it is spoken by the proverbial brother of the king of the trees. I believe this parable informs us about how difficult it is to find the right leader for a job or an organization or a nation. Why so many times a tyrant will find his or her way to a seat of power. I believe this parable has so much insight into what good and bad leaders look like and where they come from, as well as what a good and bad work environment and a good and a bad nation looks like and where they come from. Today we're going to be talking about kings and trees, about Baals and Gaals. We're going to be talking about Gideon's sons, about the first king of Israel. And no, I don't mean Saul or David. Today we are talking about Abimelech, the son of Gideon. Today we're talking about the self-proclaimed king of the trees. Here we go. So let's start off with a quick review. Last time I talked about how Gideon pulled an Aaron Yeager, so to speak, about how he went from the man who cut down idols and saved Israel to the man who contended and fought against Israel and set up his own idols in the very place where he cut down his father's idols. Gideon ended up being a mixed bag like most leaders. He had his moments of amazing faith amidst deep doubt and fear, as well as more than a couple unsavory moments and choices on his part. This week, we're going to jump right into the story of his son, Abimelech. So we're going to start off in Judges 8, verse 28. And this is what it says. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads anymore. And the land was at rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons who came from his loins, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, and appointed his name Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died at a good old age, and was buried in the tomb of his father, Joash, in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Then it came about, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the sons of Israel again prostituted themselves and appointed Baal Berith their god. So the sons of Israel did not remember Yahweh their God, who had saved them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show any hesed to the house of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in accordance with all the good that he had done for Israel. Okay, so Gideon has a big family after his victory. It's an understatement. He has 70 sons that issue from his loins. And if you remember from last time, 70 is a number of nations in the Bible. Here, it is like Gideon has a mini nation come from his sons. He sort of feels like Jacob later on in his life, when Jacob's family was threatened because of a famine. Just like Jacob, Gideon's family reaches the same number and is threatened to be destroyed. And like Jacob's family, Gideon's family has brotherly fighting and jockeying for positions of power. All of this is soon to come. However, unlike Jacob's family, Gideon's family is essentially destroyed from the inside out by one son. On the contrary, Jacob's family, if you would recall, was saved by one son, Joseph, who was said to be killed by his brothers, right? So Jacob thought Joseph was killed by all of his other brothers. Here, Abimelech is going to, spoiler alert, kill all of his brothers. So there's an inversion going on here. Now would be a good time to talk about Abimelech's name. Abimelech means in Hebrew, my father is king. Avi means father, Melech means king. This, if you remember our time last week, is extremely ironic because Gideon specifically told the Israelites that neither him nor his sons would ever be their king. And now, years later, Gideon names one of his sons, my father is king, essentially naming himself king and placing the son as someone who seems to be a good heir to the king. I'd also like to note here that we were told Abimelech, when we are told Abimelech's name in verse 31, it's a really weird way. He says, we're told that he appointed his name Abimelech. This is a weird way in Hebrew and in English to say that you named your son something. And this weird way of naming a son is a clever way of saying that Gideon is essentially, unofficially, appointing his son as a king. Not spelling good news for Gideon's family or Israel. Something that is going to be important to know for our time today is the name Baal. This name is really important. Baal is really peculiar in Hebrew. Most people know that this name is the name of a Canaanite storm god, Baal, right? However, Baal in Hebrew is also a term that denotes Lord or Master. So this name has a bit of a double meaning. And that meaning is going to be employed heavily in the story and played upon heavily in the story. Here the people prostitutes themselves to a god that they call Baal Berith. We know who and what Baal can mean, right? But what does Berith mean? Berith is the Hebrew word for covenant. So these people are prostituting themselves to a god who is named literally the Lord of the covenant. This is going to be important because both the lords of these people and the covenants they make with these leaders or lords are going to be really important for the rest of the story. I think what's going on here is that the religious infidelity with Baal Berith, the Lord of the covenant, or Baal of the covenant, will mirror the political and infidelity and unfaithfulness between the people and Abimelech. So in other words, it's like the authors are merging the people of Shechem's political and spiritual idols, almost like they are worshiping the covenant they are about to make with Abimelech. I've spoiled a little bit, but let's keep going in the story. Judges 9 verse 1. Now Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem, to his mother's relatives, and spoke to them and to the entire family of the household of his mother's father, saying, Speak now in the hearing of all the Baals of Shechem. Which is better for you? For 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, to rule over you, or for one man to rule over you? Also, remember that I am your bone and your flesh. So his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the hearing of the Baals of Shechem. And they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, He is our relative. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal Berith, or the Lord of the covenant, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless men, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house in Ophrah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left because he had hid himself. All the Baals of Shechem and all the house of Milo assembled together, and they made Abimelech king by the oak of the memorial stone which is in Shechem. You will notice in what I deem the WAT, my Wesley's amateur translation, that I have left the word Baal untranslated here. That's because most translations render Baal as Lord, and we lose the pun and the play on words that is going on here. You will also notice that Gideon's nickname, Jerubbaal, now takes on a lot more nuance, because in Gideon's life, he's not only contending with Baal, who's the Canaanite god of thunder, he is also contending later on in his life with the Baals, or the leaders in the towns of Sukkot and Penuel. So back to the story. The number 70 pops up again, this time in the form of 70 pieces of silver, and in Gideon's 70 sons. Now, I already talked about how Gideon's sons are like Jacob's mini nation, and it seems here like they are ruling Israel together, like they have formed a little bit of like a senate or an oligarchy of sorts, and to exert power over Israel. And now they ratify the covenant with Abimelech by taking these 70 pieces of silver from the temple of the Lord of Covenants and that money is used to pay for a band of mercenaries who help kill Avimelech's brothers. Let's remember that 70 is a number of nations in the Bible, and here it looks like Avimelech is founding his own nation through the slaughtering of another nation, which happens to be his own family, and this slaughtering is funded by money that comes from an idolatrous temple of the Lord of the Covenants. This is what it looks like to worship the covenant of the king, in my opinion. This is what it looks like to idolize leaders and the power that they offer. Now would also be a good time to talk about Shechem and Jacob's story. I mentioned it briefly last time. Shechem means something like shoulder in Hebrew. Shechem happens to be the first city which Abraham goes to when he enters the promised land. So it's the first city which Jacob goes to when he re-enters the promised land, and it's also the first city that Abraham goes to when he enters the promised land for the first time. So the story keeps following and inverting Jacob's story, right? If you remember last time, Jacob went from Penuel to Succoth and then to Shechem. Now Gideon's story is going from Succoth to Penuel, and then he finally liberates Israel, and the story returns now to Shechem. So in Jacob's story, when he goes to Shechem, there's a ruler in that town whose name is also Shechem. This ruler rapes one of Jacob's daughters, whose name is Dinah. But Jacob doesn't do anything about this. So Dinah's brothers, Levi and Simeon, Jacob had a lot of sons, and Levi and Simeon were the full brothers of Dinah. So they both had this. Jacob had a lot of wives, and one of Jacob's wives had Dinah, Levi, and Simeon. Levi and Simeon were her full brothers. They're not happy about this, so they slaughter the whole town of Shechem, despite Shechem wanting to make peace. It seems to me that Levi and Simeon go a bit beyond justice, and they take vengeance. They don't just kill Shechem, they kill his whole town. In Jacob's story, there's a threefold plundering of Levi and Simeon destroying the town of Shechem. It's kind of interesting and mirroring the threefold plundering that's already happened in Gideon's story. We are told that they took their flocks, their herds, and their donkeys. That is Levi and Simeon. They also took, quote, their little ones, their wives, even everything that was in their houses. That's in Jacob's story with Levi and Simeon. So now let's bring this back to Abimelech's story. Here, instead of the Israelites slaughtering all of Shechem, a man who is half Shechemite and half Israelite will slaughter all of Gideon's sons, Israelites, or people descended from Jacob, on one stone, and then he himself will slaughter and burn down the entire town of Shechem. Again, I'm sorry, I'm spoiling the story a lot here. I think there's a lot of symbolism here in Abimelech slaughtering all of these men on one stone. Let's remember that Gideon brought an angel, a sacrifice on one stone in his own hometown, and that one of Gideon's enemies, Raven, was also executed on a rock. Right, so Gideon offered up a sacrifice on a rock, and one of his enemies was executed on a rock. Now his son is executing all of his other sons, his brothers, with this sort of evil sacrifice that ratifies an idolatrous covenant on a single rock. But, like many times in the Bible, there is a remnant from this slaughter. The youngest son is able to escape the slaughtering, and we're going to pick up the story with Jotham again. Judges 9, starting in verse 7. Now, when they told Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim and raised his voice and called out. And he said to them, "Listen to me, you Baals of Shechem, that God may listen to you. Once upon a time, the trees went to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, 'Reign over us.' But the olive tree said to them, 'Shall I give up my fat with which God and men are honored to go sway over the trees?' Then the trees said to the fig tree, 'You, come reign over us.' But the fig tree said to them, 'Shall I give up my sweetness and my good fruit to sway over the trees?' Then the trees said to the vine, 'You, come reign over us.' But the vine said, 'Shall I give up my new wine which cheers God and men to go sway over the trees?' Then all the trees said to the thorn bush, 'You, come reign over us.' And the thorn bush said to the trees, If you are truly anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Now then, if you have acted truthfully and with integrity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Yerubbaal and his house, and if you have dealt with him as he deserved, for my father fought for you, he put his neck on the line and saved you from the hand of Midian. But you have risen against my father's house today, and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his female slave, king over the Baals of Shechem, because he is your relative. So if you have acted truthfully and with integrity toward Yerubbaal and his house this day, be joyful about Abimelech, and may he also be joyful about you. But if not, may fire come out from Abimelech and consume the Baals of Shechem and house Milo. And may fire come out of the Baals of Shechem and from house Milo and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham escaped and fled and went to the well, and he stayed there because of his brother Abimelech. Now, before I talk about this parable, which is really, really interesting, I think it's really important to talk about the setting here, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. They are very important mountains. I have a picture in the show notes. I'll probably have like a script here, and I'll add the picture in the script. Additionally, if you're listening to this, you can Google Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal or Shechem. As you can see, these two mountains sandwich the town of Shechem. So Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal are two mountains that Shechem is situated in between, right? So it's like it creates this little valley. So Shechem is situated between these two mountains, which are really just two big hills. Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal are important because toward the end of the Torah, Moses commands half of the Israelites to stand on Mount Gerizim and the other half on Mount Ebal. And then he has the Israelites on Mount Gerizim read out all of the blessings they would receive if they obey the covenant. And the other half of the Israelites are on Mount Ebal, or Ebal, and they read out all the covenant curses that would happen to them if they disobey the covenant. Again, covenants are really important in this story. Shechem is a town that is situated between the place where Israel affirmed the covenant and the blessings or curses, the consequences of obeying or rejecting that covenant with Yahweh their God. It is the first town that Abraham and Jacob went to when they entered the promised land, and now Gideon's son Abimelech has ratified a bloody, murderous covenant with the people of Shechem right in between the mountains of blessing and cursing. And that covenant is paid for by the money from a God called the Lord of the Covenant. Now Jotham stands on Mount Gerizim, the mountain of blessings. But instead of blessings, he essentially pronounces curses on Abimelech and Israel for making this covenant together and turning their backs on Yahweh. I think the reason that Jotham stands on the mountain of blessings is because Abimelech is him being cursed would actually be a blessing for Israel. It's almost like he's saying that Israel would be much, much better off with Abimelech. It's additionally worth noting that Jotham is the more righteous brother, and he's standing on the mountain of blessings. And Abimelech will find himself soon on the mountain of curses. I found Shechem to be a really interesting place. It's almost like Shechem is a microcosm for all Israel, because the town sits literally in between the mountain of obedience, which brings blessings, and rebellion, which brings curses. And this parable, which is given to the people of Shechem, is also like a microcosm for all of Israel and all of humanity as well. Okay, now let's talk about the parable. I like to call this the parable of the king of the trees. The Bible Project did a great series a while back where they studied out the theme of trees in the Bible. And in that series, they lay out really well how trees are analogous and oftentimes likened to people in the Bible. You can see this in the creation story when humanity is blessed and told to be, quote, fruitful and multiply, unquote, and how children are called seeds of their parents in the Bible. We don't have too much time to talk about this, but for now, just know that trees are likened to people a lot in the Bible. And if you want to learn more, I'd recommend going to the Bible Project for that. Here, this parable seems to really highlight and accentuate that metaphor of people being trees. There are three trees that all the other trees ask to be their king, but of these three trees, each of them gives a reason as to why they should not be the people's king. Essentially, each of these trees have a better and a more noble task to do. But then the only tree that says yes to being their king doesn't give them a choice to back out of the deal. Once they ask him, he's like, you can't back out now. The thorn bush tells the other trees, essentially, take refuge under my thorns or else. Additionally, the thorn bush doesn't seem to produce any fruit. It just seems to be there. All the other trees produce something good. The thorn bush, just all it produces is threats. It's not producing anything for the people around it, for the other trees. In fact, it's producing threats. It seems to me that the basic takeaway of this parable is that Abimelech is the thorn bush, and that a thorn bush is the kind of leader that as soon as he is even asked to be in a position of power, he does everything he can in his power to keep that position of power. A thorn bush is a leader that will tear down the whole organization if he can't be at the top. A thorn bush is a leader that produces no fruit for the people under him. Did you notice that all the other trees have a job that they are already doing for humanity, and that's why they're asked to be the king of the trees? But the thorn bush is the only one who's not doing something for others. The thorn bush's shade is almost like a prison of thorns that you can't escape from. And here, I think, is a really good time to point out that thorn bushes are a symbol of work in exile. We've mentioned this before, and thorn bushes and thorns and thistles have come up earlier already. When Adam is told of the consequences for eating from the forbidden fruit in Genesis 3, God tells him that, quote, "Cursed is the ground because of you, and that both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you," unquote. So instead of the ground producing sweet fruit for Adam, it will now produce the things that would pierce and poke him. His work would produce pain and hostility. We should remember here that Gideon used thorns and thistles from the wilderness to punish the elders of Sukkot. Now, his son, Abimelech, seems to be personified as a thorn bush. So whereas Gideon started to use thorn bushes to make the work of him, those under him, like painful and bad and adversarial, his son becomes the personification of bitter adversarial work under a cruel boss. This leads me to my last point about this parable. It seems to me that this parable is a commentary on work. What is it that will exile someone and take away the Edenic ideal of what their workplace should be like? Bad management. Ain't that the truth? Management and leadership can make the difference between a great job and a terrible work culture. Additionally, it seems to me that this parable also explores the idea of searching for management. Sometimes the best candidates are the ones that aren't available because they're already producing so many good things for the world. If I were to expand on this parable, I think that no one is truly a fig tree and no one is truly a thorn bush. Here, I'm just giving my personal input. I think that leaders and managers are often somewhere in the middle of a tree and a thorn bush. I think most people and most leaders are actually more like a blackberry bush. This is a plant that produces both fruit and thorns. I think Gideon seems to be painted as a mixture of thorns and fruit. I mean, he does start off saving Israel, right? He even refuses to be their king, which is a really good thing to do. But then he almost immediately abuses his power, quarrels with his own people, sets up an idol in place of the pagan shrines he tore down. And then Abimelech doesn't really do anything good for Israel. He is thorns, right? He simply kills his whole family, 70 sons, and abuses his power from the get-go. Okay, so let's keep going on in the story. We're given this parable, right? Yotham, I'm probably saying that name wrong, gives this parable, and now we're going to pick up the story. It's very foreboding. Judges 9, verses 22 through 29. Now Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years. Then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the Baals of Shechem. And the Baals of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, so that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal would come, and their blood would be placed on their brother Abimelech, who killed them, and on the Baals of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. The Baals of Shechem set up men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed everyone who would pass by them on the road. And this was reported to Abimelech. Now Gaal, the son of Eved, came with his relatives and crossed over into Shechem. and the Baals of Shechem trusted him. So they went out to a field and gathered the grapes of their vineyard, and trampled them, and held a festival. And they went into the house of their God, and ate and drank, and cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, the son of Eved, said, Who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem, that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Yerubbaal? And is Zebul not his governor? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? If only this people were in my hands, then I would do away with Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, Muster your army and sally forth. Okay, now if you couldn't tell, this part of the story is going to be all about Baals and Gaals. Or if you're Texan like me, you might call this part Gales and Bales. Again, I've elected not to translate the Hebrew word Baal anywhere it occurs in the story, because as you can see, there's a very obvious play on words here. The Baals get angry with the new manager, and then they get this guy with a very fitting name, Gaal, which rhymes with Baal in Hebrew. Ironically, Gaal's name means loather, or the one who loathes. His father's name is Eved, which is the Hebrew word for servant. So he is literally the loather who is the son of the servant. Gaal will become an icon for the people of Shechem, who are not surprisingly extremely embittered to their very poorly appointed new king. I also want to make a note here, something that I recently discovered only today, actually, before putting this before recording this podcast, that Gaal's name in Hebrew sounds exactly like a word in Hebrew which means to be a kinsman, redeemer, or to redeem. The word in Hebrew to redeem is pronounced Gaal as well, and the word for loather is also pronounced Gaal. The only difference between these words is that they're spelled with one letter difference, right? So these words sound exactly the same, but there's only one letter difference in how they're spelled. So they're spelled very slightly differently. So Gaal is not only a name that rhymes with Baal, it also could have a double meaning here when you pronounce it. This word, Gaal, could be the loather who is the son of the servant, or it could also sound like the kinsman redeemer who is the son of the servant. In other words, Gaal's name could have a double meaning, which means both someone who loathes the Baal or the Lord, and also someone who is going to redeem the people from their Baal or their Lord. I hope that makes sense. So Yotham's, probably saying that differently every single time, his parable is starting to come true, right? There's fire and tension brewing between Abimelech and his subjects. The Baals, or the lords of Shechem, are now robbing Abimelech's people on the side of the road, and there's this leader who walks into this situation whose name rhymes with the Baals, the leaders, who loathes Abimelech and who could become a potential redeemer and savior for the people. So Gaal even directly challenges Abimelech, right? They go have this feast together, and he's like, who is Abimelech, right? So he's egging this guy on. The battle is set. The tension is brewing. All we need is the spark. Let's keep reading. Judges 9, starting in verse 30. When Zebul, the leader of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Eved, his anger burned. So, using deception, he sent messengers to Abimelech, saying, Look, Gaal, the son of Eved, and his relatives have come to Shechem, and look, they are stirring up the city against you. So now, arise by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. Then in the morning, as soon as the sun is up, you shall rise early and attack the city. And look, when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you shall do to them whatever you are able. So Abimelech and all the people who were with him got up at night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 columns. Now Gaal, the son of Eved, went out and stood at the entrance of the city gate. And Abimelech and the people who were with him arose from the ambush. When Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, You are just seeing the shadow of the mountains, as if it were people. And Gaal spoke again and said, Look, people are coming down from the center of the land, and one column is coming by way of the diviner's oak, or the diviner's oak. Then Zebul said to him, Where then is your big mouth with which you said, Who is Abimelech that we should serve him? Is this not the people whom you rejected? Go out now and fight them. So Gaal went out before the Baals of Shechem and fought against Abimelech. But Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him. And many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech stayed in Arumah, but Zavul drove out Gaal and his relatives so that they could not stay in Shechem. Now it came about the next day that the people went out to the field, and it was reported to Abimelech. So he took his people and divided them into 3 columns and lay in wait in the field. When he looked, behold, the people were coming out from the city. He rose against them and killed them. Then Abimelech and the column that was with him rushed forward and stood at the entrance of the city gate. Then the other 2 columns attacked all who were in the field and killed them. Abimelech fought against the city that whole day, and he captured the city and killed the people who were in it. Then he tore down the city and sowed it with salt. Okay, real quick, I want to pause here because there's still more in the story to go. I'd like to point out that this siege is kind of similar to Gideon's surprise attack on the Midianites. They both had 3 columns of troops attacking an unsuspecting people. It starts out with 4 here, then it turns to 3. Also, Abimelech attacks the city twice, kind of 3 times really. The first time he clears out Gaal's men, the next time he clears out the Baals of Shechem in a field. Then he finishes the job by tearing down a city. So either way, I think it looks like there's a number 2 there, right? Or a number 3. I also think it's interesting that the Shechemites, who are Abimelech's brothers, are ambushed in a field. I should note here, a field is usually a place where brothers quarrel and fight in the Bible. I'm not going to go into this too in depth right now, but this theme starts with Cain and Abel, the first brothers in the Bible, and that story, Cain brings Abel to a field to kill them. Later on in the Bible, Joseph goes to a field to look for his brothers who fake his death and sell him into slavery. Here, Abimelech lies in wait in a field for the citizens of Shechem and slaughters his brethren in a field, which to me feels a bit reminiscent of Cain luring Abel out to the field to kill him. I should say I need to do a little bit more work on this, of the symbolism of a field or the field in the Bible, but it does seem like there's like a, brother killing brother in a field theme going on here. So I think it's safe to say that fire has begun to break out between Abimelech and the people of Shechem. But there's still more fire to come, specifically between the Baals or the lords of Shechem and Abimelech, right? It goes both ways. So let's keep reading. Judges 9, starting in verse 46. When all the Baals of the tower of Shechem heard, they entered the inner chamber of the house of El-Berith, or the God of the covenant. And it was reported to Abimelech that all the Baals of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, and he and all the people were with them. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a branch from the trees, and lifted it and put it on his shoulder. Then he said to the people who were with him, "What you saw me do, hurry, do likewise." So all the people also cut down each one his branch and followed Abimelech, and put them on top of the inner chamber, and set the inner chamber on fire over those inside, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. Then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he camped against Thebez and captured it. But there was a strong tower in the center of the city, and all the men and women with all the Baals of the city fled there and shut themselves in, and they went up to the roof of the tower. So Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it, and approached the entrance of the tower to burn it down with fire. But a woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, quick, so that it will not be said of me, 'A woman killed him.'" So the young man pierced him through, and he died. Now when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, each left for his home. So God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech which he had done to his father in killing his 70 brothers. God also returned the evil of the men of Shechem on their heads, and the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal, came on them. Okay, so I want to start off talking about Mount Zalmon. Probably saying that wrong. Mount Zalmon is another name for Mount Ebal, or Mount Ebal, which was a mountain of curses. It is really fitting then that Abimelech's brother Jotham is the one who stood on the mountain of blessings, Mount Gerizim, and now the evil brother literally starts a fire that consumes the people of Shechem on the mountain of curses, Mount Ebal. So Jotham stands on the mountain of blessings, and Abimelech stands on the mountain of curses. Also note the parallel with Gideon tearing down towers. Gideon tore down one tower in Penuel. Now Abimelech, not to be outdone by dad, tries to tear down 2 towers. but is killed while trying to burn down the second one. Also, we aren't really told why Avimelech tries to burn down this tower in Thebez, but if you remember in Jotham's parable, the thorn bush threatens to burn down even the trees in Lebanon if the other trees refuse for him to be king over them anymore. And here, Avimelech seems to just go on this indiscriminate, murderous rage, taking out what seems to be an innocent city in Thebez. Now, if you hadn't noticed here, a woman crushes Avimelech's head and kills him. That sounds pretty similar to a previous story in Judges we talked about, where Yael killed another enemy of Israel, Sisera, by smashing his head in with a tent peg and a hammer. I think we're supposed to see Abimelech as a snake-like king whose head is crushed by a woman. Even Abimelech's words to his servant are eerily similar to Deborah's prophecy to Barak. Remember, Deborah told Barak, in the hand of a woman, Yahweh will deliver Sisera. And here, Abimelech tells his servant, draw your sword and kill me, so that it will not be said of me, a woman killed him. The emphasis in both stories is that a woman killed Israel's enemy by crushing his head, and a woman gains the glory. Here we can see that the theme of the seed of the woman crushing the head of the seed of the serpent is popping up again. I think the point of these details is to show us that the seed of the serpent can come from even a man like Gideon, who had pure motives. The seed of the woman can come from a random woman from Thebez that's just trying to survive. Remember, in Deborah's story, the seed of the woman was actually a descendant of Cain. So we can see that it doesn't really matter who your parents are, or where you come from, or like who you are, what your last name is. Your destiny is determined more by your actions and less by your history and your lineage. It's always difficult to spot the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. And oftentimes, it's not so cut and dry as to who is being controlled by the devil and who is being used by God. Whew, okay, that was a lot. What were some takeaways from this? I think this story is so important because it is a microcosm for what is going to follow in the Samuel scroll. Gideon and Abimelech provide us with a foreshadowing to what is going to happen with Israel's first dynasty through Saul and David. This story also lays the groundwork for our understanding as to why God should be Israel's king. It's like Israel tries to experiment with the political system of a monarchy, and from the outset, even with this small scope of Abimelech and his reign, it starts and almost immediately ends in a power-hungry bloodbath. Here I can't help but drawing a parallel to leadership within churches. It is more than possible to have a leader like Abimelech in a local church congregation, but it is just as likely more than possible to have a leader like Gideon in your local church. And the Gideons are interesting, in my opinion, because they do overall a lot of good, but they are still sinful and flawed like the rest of us. They inevitably have some idols which are set up even with the purest of motives. And I actually think that's okay, because no one's going to be like Jesus. We all have proverbial berries and barbs. We all have gifts and flaws, but it's about trying to maximize your berries and your fruit and minimizing the barbs and the thorns that you leave behind. One more thing this is going to bring up a little bit of an ancient political debate within the Bible. And that debate is which system of governance is better. Usually the Bible doesn't get super political, and I guess sometimes it does, but it doesn't feel like the Bible is really political a lot of times. Here, there's like a debate almost going on. Is a judge or a sheriff or a grassroots form of leadership better, or is a kingship and a dynasty better? Here's a bit of a spoiler. The answer is actually neither. They're both set forth as really flawed and really bad, in my opinion. But there does seem to be a system that is put forth. So where there's not a system put forth, there does seem to be a solution. And that solution is a person, not a system. If only there was a leader that truly acted like a seed of the woman, a leader that was an ideal human, an actual good anointed one, a good sheriff, a good king, a good Messiah. And indeed, the Hebrew word Mashiach means anointed one. This, however, is a theme that won't really show up again until the Samuel scroll, where Israel's next two kings will rise up. So Judges and the story of Gideon starts this theme of a king in Israel, and Abimelech indeed in this story is said to be the king over Israel. and it ends almost immediately terribly. But that theme of the kingship will not come up again really until Samuel. And that, I believe, is the whole story of Gideon. It leaves us wondering, will there ever truly be a rightful and a good king of the trees? Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you all next time.